Thank you, everyone, for coming. My name is Jackie Shelton. I am the chair of Northern Nevada Marches Forward. We are an official 501c3 now after putting on the Reno Women's March for the last 5 years, 5. And we realize that there's a lot of issues that get covered during the Women's March where people will speak for, we give them 3 minutes to talk about very important issues. And what we've realized, I mean, obviously 3 minutes is not long enough. 45, 50 minutes is also not long enough, but we thought we would be a little bit better by having experts speak on these particular issues once a month. So we thank you all for coming. Today, we are talking about how to be an LGBTQIA+ ally. I have been told that the acceptable term now is queer, but I'm not there yet. So I am very excited that our board member, Tony Avila, brought in his husband, Dr. Todd Felts, to speak to us tonight on how to be an ally. He's going to talk about a lot of things that many of us probably know some of it, but I'm going to guess that most of us don't know most of it. He's going to take questions. So if you have this, go ahead and put those in the chat and we will address them. He's going to talk until about 7 o'clock. And then if we want to keep going on conversation, we can go until about 7:30. Dr. Todd Felts is a professor at the University of Nevada, Reno in the journalism school. He has decades of experience working in politics, working as an educator, working as a public relations professional. He's going to go into a lot of that himself. I've known Todd for a long time, and as a mother of a gay child, I'm very grateful to people like Todd and to Tony for paving the way and making it a lot easier. We were talking before you came on about how much nicer it is for younger people, and that is a lot because of the people who've had to pave this way. So thank you, Todd. I also want to thank Wes McQuillan, who is our tech person for all of these, and my co-host tonight, Jane Grossman, who is our vice chair for Northern Nevada Marches Forward. So Todd, take it away.
Jackie, thank you so much. I do appreciate you asking me to do this. In fact, I would say I am honored to be able to talk about this very important issue because there are some really outstanding, extraordinary queer people in our community who could just as easily speak to you this evening and probably have some pretty incredible stories that they could share to help bring light on this important issue. But I will start and I will give it my best shot. We're going to talk tonight about how you can become an ally to LGBTQ plus IA individuals. And I will say that there is so much data that tells us that allies, and it's true for queer people, but it's true for people of color, it's true for lots of different marginalized communities in our country. If we have people who support us, who stand beside us, who give us the opportunity to really be ourselves, then it makes our fights in politics, our fights in employment, our fights in equality so much easier. So all of you, I thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk to you tonight about becoming a better ally, but also recognizing that knowledge is power. And the more we know, the more that we can work together to combat the politicization of queer people in our community and in our country. So I will start with this guy. This is me. I am 20 years old in this picture. I am at a college in North Carolina, a Lutheran college, where I went to perhaps play football. And I remember, as a high schooler, how much praise and how much support I would gain when I talked about football. And deep down, I really wanted to go to college and be a cheerleader. And I really didn't know how to express that in this small southern town in North Carolina The good news is that I could do backflips, so that made things a lot easier. But one of the things where my coming out process began was when I went to college. They had male cheerleaders, and many of the male cheerleaders were former football players, former baseball players. So they were athletic. Many of them were straight. And so it kind of gave me the opportunity to begin my coming out process. But my coming out process did not really come years later, almost 4 years later, at age 24, when I am working on a political campaign for the governor of North Carolina. I was on the news all the time as a spokesperson for the governor. And I remember I knew it was time to come out. I knew it was time to have that experience, but it was very, very scary. And like many people, I've heard a lot of coming out stories over the years. You know, friends kind of sit around and talk about issues. And, you know, coming out can be really scary. But as an ally, you should know that coming out is perhaps, or at least in my experience, one of the most emotional, most thoughtful, most life-altering moments. I've heard from many of my own students, coming out has become a lot easier than it was, 20 plus years ago. But to understand that coming out is a process, it's the time when a person first acknowledges, accepts, and appreciates his or her sexual orientation. So I may have come out to myself before I had the opportunity to come out to others. I remember my best friend, her name is Greta. I used to literally call her and tell her all kinds of things just to kind of gauge what she's going to say when I finally come out. And then finally, after the 8th or 9th late night phone call, she says, Todd, are you gay? And I'm like, yeah, I am. And she goes, finally, okay, listen, I'm thinking about going shopping. And she just skipped right over and moved on. And I was like, why was I so scared about this? But for many people, coming out can mean a lot of things. And some people come out multiple times. I mean, I have friends who come out as lesbian to me early in their lives, and then perhaps later they come out as transgendered to me. So coming out isn't always just a finite moment, but it's something that we may experience throughout our lifetimes. So, but the most important thing here is understanding that if you were to talk to queer people, sit down with queer people, everyone has a very unique, a very interesting, in my case, sometimes sordid experience in their coming out process. But when they are willing to share it with others, share it with their parents, share it with their siblings, that is such a big moment for so many queer people. I want to tell you some good news. I always like to start with good news. And there is a lot of good news about the queer community. Data from 2021 shows that most straight or non-LGBT people personally know at least one queer person, and non-LGBTQ people are actually much more comfortable today with queer people. They're very comfortable with them appearing in films, in movies, and ads they consume. And this has really opened the door for more opportunities in the future. You may remember, some of you may remember the day that Ellen DeGeneres came out on her show and on her sitcom many, many years ago. And honestly, there was this shake across America that someone on a primetime television show would come out to the American public. But today, years later, we finally have more queer people in leading roles. We have queer people in advertisements. We have people represented across really the spectrum. We also know that when non-LGBTQ people are exposed to queer media messages, they are more likely to experience increasing levels of acceptance and being comfortable towards LGBTQ people. And this is really good news. Companies that do include LGBTQ people in their ads, also like providing same-sex health insurance options for their employees. Most non-LGBTQ people and consumers look more favorably upon companies that do this. And this is really big news. This is, I mean, it sounds like they should be doing that, but just a decade ago, and I'm going to sort of introduce you to the Human Rights Campaign scorecard. We still have a lot of work to do in a lot of states in America in providing equal rights to queer people. Some other good news is that LGBTQIA plus individual are a very powerful segment of our community, of our society, of our democracy. Queer people vote. They often work diligently on campaigns, but they also have what much research has shown, a $3.7 trillion purchasing power that really can have a very big issue. Research also shows, for example, that gay men are some of the most brand loyal consumers of products. So many large brands know that if you can get people within our community to use a brand, they're very brand loyal. For example, it's very hard to get a gay guy to change his deodorant, a different brand of deodorant. They get involved in one and they're very brand loyal individuals. And also, according to the Global Workplace Study, LGBTQ plus, the attitude survey among people who are not LGBTQ plus, but know 81% of identifying individuals and allies are more likely to purchase a good or product from a company that supports LGBTQ plus equality. I know of lots of brands. I lived in Washington, D.C. for many years. I lived in DuPont Circle. I lived in one of the most highest gay population or queer populations in the country. And I can remember brands specifically working very hard to target people in my neighborhood, and they would continuously doing that. And that really has kind of had an impact on me, on my purchasing power and other things. And I also know that there's an HRC scorecard of brands that do good things for their employees. There's certain gas stations that I do not purchase gas unless, I'm on dead empty. I mean, I make a lot of decisions based on companies that do good things for the queer community. So this is just one example, and I would like to say to all of you, of course, time doesn't allow me to go through all 50 states, but the Human Rights Campaign, there's actually an app that you can load on your phone, and you can kind of look up brands, you can look up states, you can look up a lot of different things on the HRC scorecard. So the URL will be provided at the end, and I hope many of you will spend some time looking at some of the successes we've had in many states, and then other states that still has some work to do. The good news, again, some good news, if you look, Nevada is one of the few states that have all the boxes checked. So I'm very proud to live in Nevada. I'm very proud on recent legislation by our legislators. They've worked really hard to pass laws against hate crimes, laws against school anti-bullying. We even allow transgendered healthcare in the state of Nevada. So there's a lot of really great things that are going on in Nevada. I will compare it only to North Carolina because that's where I was born and where I grew up most of my life. I worked for the governor of North Carolina. And even when I lived in North Carolina, I felt like the state was quite progressive, but you can see that they have some work to do in achieving equality in North Carolina. Many of the Western states have a lot of the boxes checked in blue. And so, again, I'm also very proud to live in the West. I've lived here for 14 years. I moved here from Atlanta, Georgia. And even though, again, I lived in the third queerest zip code in America before coming to Reno, I felt it was quite progressive. But as we all know, Georgia also has some work to do with LGBTQ equality. So there are some bad news, and this is recent. So just a few months ago, the state of Florida passed the Don't Say Gay legislation. It was, I'm sure we all heard about it. It was quite shocking for me personally, but I also know if you look back to the terrible moment in queer history when 49 people were murdered at a gay bar in Orlando. I mean, that only happened, 6 years ago. So that's not very long ago. It's very current, very modern day. In the past 7 years, there have been 16 states, and you can read on the screen from Alabama to Wyoming, who have considered legislation that would restrict access to multi-user restrooms, locker rooms, and other sex-segregated facilities on the basis of sex or gender constraints. And so one of the things that we know is that this kind of started again with my home state in North Carolina, which its legislatures in 2015 passed the famous bathroom bill, and some other states followed. But everybody from the NBA to the ACC, large organizations, rebelled against it. It ended up in the Supreme Court in North Carolina, and that law was overturned in 2019. So there is a lot of stuff that continues to go on with the recent ruling with Roe v. Wade. We are seeing conversations going on, which should be mobilizing all of us to say that things can happen in 2022 and that we have to be diligent and aware and informed, which is why I'm so happy to be with you tonight, so that we can understand the issues that are really going to impact our lives in the next decade. So I want to start tonight, and I hope that some of you have heard of this before, but I really like this example. There are other examples, but I'd like to introduce you to the gingerbread person. The gingerbread person is a idea that we are made up of more than what's between the ears, what's between the legs, and what's in our heart. So I really like the way that this explains it, that, if what's between the ears is our identity, and we may be born with an identity between the legs, but we may very possibly have a different identity between the ears. And even if we have a different identity between the ears, we may still have the same attraction that is expected of us from society based on what's between our legs. And then we also, when you put all of this together, the way that we identify ourselves, our attractedness to other people, or in some cases, asexuals, perhaps there is no sexual attraction. And then ultimately, what we are born biologically with between the legs. Those overall creates what we call our ability to be expressive, our expression, the way we choose as a human being to express ourselves. And sort of the pre-chat before tonight's conversation was, we often think originally about what society thinks about us, and then we finally, in the second step, move into what we think about us. And I hope that there will be a day that we can choose to think about ourselves in the way that we see our identity, what we see and what we feel when we look in the mirrors, versus what other people thinks that we should see and believe when we look in the mirror. That is going to make society so much easier. It's going to make people much healthier. It's going to make people have experiences that are much more positive. So again, at the end of this tonight, I am going to provide some links. If you would like to dig deeper into the gingerbread person, there's all kinds of great opportunities to really understand this in a very great way. If we were live in person, I would have baked you a gingerbread person and you would have it in front of you and we would have talked about it that way. But because we're in a digital format, I was unable to do that. But it really does make sense. I think this is a really good way to explain things to young people. I think young people get this. It makes sense to them. It's simple. It's easy to understand. So just real quick before I move on, I just want to say that gender identity, gender expression, our anatomic selves do not always have to line up with our sexual attractions, our romantic attractions. In fact, I know people who are romantically attracted to one sex and sexually attracted to other sexes. And that is perfectly okay. And so if we begin to look at human beings as more than what's anatomically between the legs and begin to explore that there are lots of variations, lots of different ways to look at this, I think we're all going to get along a lot better, honestly. So to summarize, attraction doesn't necessarily indicate behavior, doesn't necessarily indicate identity. So who we're attracted to does not mean that we're going to act that way. And the way that we act is not necessarily going to be the way that we identify. So I always like to say this and give everybody like a second or two to let that sink in, because I really think this is a sign that we should all carry with us in our lives. Every human being that we meet. I mean, I have to, I am a student of being a gay man, and I am a student of my students sometimes. I've learned so much about identity over the years from my very own students. I started about 4 or 5 years ago telling my class of 100 students on day one, I am going to make assumptions about your pronouns. I am going to make assumptions about your identity. If you think I am going to get that assumption incorrect, please come up to me after class and let me know. And I always get a couple of people, and I love that. And when they tell me that, it offers such a great opportunity to learn from them. And that is really what we should be as students of attraction, behavior, and identity. So let's talk for just a moment about pronouns. And I get asked questions about pronouns more than anything else that I can imagine. People don't ask me about my coming out stories anymore. They ask me about pronouns. They get very confused. So first off, I want you to know that 2 years ago, the New York Times, in their celebrated editorial guidelines, decided that we can use the words they as a singular pronoun. Yay. And so so when you're writing a news story and you do not know if the person has not provided you the pronoun they prefer, or if there is some uncertainty, there can be one they in your story instead of two theys as previously demanded by every English teacher in America. So one of the things that makes pronouns important is that pronouns, by definition, is what shows other people that you value their identity. And what this means is that when we ask people, what pronoun do you prefer, and then correctly use that pronoun, it's one of the most basic ways to show your respect for an individual's gender identity. So when someone is referred to in the wrong pronoun, it can make them feel disrespected, invalidated, dismissed, alienated, or dysphoric, and often all of the above. And so I have a wonderful neighbor who has a grandchild who has chosen to change their pronoun to they. And we've worked really hard because we knew them as the she pronoun for 2 or 3 years. And so we worked very hard to call them the right pronoun and the right name. And it's just changed our entire relationship with this individual because they know that we respect and think that their identity is very important. And so one of the things that I will say about pronouns, it's okay. It's okay to get pronouns wrong once in a while, but it is not okay to get them wrong over and over and over. So one of the best ways to do this is to ask people, or if people share with you that they, if they prefer a different pronoun, try to stick with it because it really does show respect and think. There is a question in the chat bar I just wanted to address. The question is, why is it important for straight people to list their pronouns? So, there are people who, and I know in Spanish, you probably, they work really, really hard. They spend a lot of time on masculine and feminine words, which are usually, they have to be congruent with the pronoun that they adhere to. And so there's some movements in the Latinx community to try to just use the A and the O after the names however you want to. And I do know that one of the reasons historically and culturally, and some of the things that people demand, is that the he and the she pronoun, or the him and the her pronoun, has been a way to categorize individuals historically, and it has helped provide some type of congruency. But that does not necessarily mean that it's working today. So perhaps you might run into someone who wants to be pronounless. I have personally not met that person yet, but and you could try to work to try to do that if that's what they ask for. All right, so as we get into, this is sort of just another, I gotta move my little bar here. So really sexual orientation, and we're gonna talk about other things in just a moment, but sexual orientation is a spectrum. I think, that there are people who may be 60% attracted to the opposite sex and maybe 40% attracted to the same sex. But I think the most important thing is that sexual orientation is an attraction that really reaches across a spectrum. It's not that everyone is either 100% sexually attracted to the same sex or the opposite sex, or in some cases, with genderqueer individuals attracted to the same sex, but a certain type of individual within the same sex. So it is quite fluid. It is a spectrum. Examples that are often used are heterosexual, straight, gay, lesbian, bisexual, queer, pansexual, asexual. There are some outdated and often offensive terms. You can read them for yourself, but I will take one out and sort of talk about it for a moment, and that is the word homosexual. I have used this term quite readily throughout most of my life as an openly gay man, but there are many people who prefer you not to use this because this was a term used by psychologists, and it is a medical term, and it was used to define the difference between people who are attracted to the opposite sex versus people who were attracted to the same sex. And it wasn't until the 1960s when an individual who was homosexual was not a deviant. So before the 60s, people who were attracted to the same sex were considered by the American Psychological Association as having some kind of deviant behavior. So people who use the word homosexuals are often using it as a way, and they feel that it's derogatory because it was meant to be a medical term and not a term that describes fully their sexual orientation. And anytime you're talking about someone's orientation or their lifestyle or their preference, those descriptors are also outdated. Um, uh, my husband and I were at a party at some of the coolest people we know. They had a friend in town, and they asked my husband, well, when did you choose this lifestyle? And we can totally tell who the woman is in this relationship versus the man. I mean, so this was like not even 5 months ago. So people are still using some type of outdated terminology. And after talking to this individual and trying to be nice and educate her, I realized that she just really didn't know what she was talking about. And I think this last time she had a conversation with a queer person was years and years ago. And so I hope that she won't make that mistake again, but it was an interesting moment for sure. So another thing that I wanted to move to is kind of sexual continuums, gender and sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, gender assignment. These are all terms that we use quite readily to help understand the individual. So we'll start with heterosexism. Heterosexism is this idea that assumes that being a heterosexual, someone attracted to the opposite sex, is the only natural, normal, or moral mode of love, romanticism, sexuality. And heterosexism has historically granted privileges to heterosexuals. I mean, I still see this. I go home to a family reunion, and it is look at the family structure, look at the kids. The conversations are all about those sort of heteronormative individuals in my family, and then finally they get around to me. So I see all that. Some of the ways that heterosexuals are able to get this privilege is they are very easily able to show affection in public, maybe a kiss on the lips, hold hands, hugging in public. Society's like, fine. My husband and I have to be very careful sometimes where we hold hands walking down the street. And we celebrate those moments when, we're in places like San Francisco or Palm Springs where we can hold hands and be ourselves. Another way is heterosexism allows people to not face rejection from one's family and friends because of gender identity, because of sexual orientation. And this societal normalcy, the assumption that heterosexual individuals in relationships are valid, they're healthy, and they're non-deviant. So heterosexism is an idea that we all live with. Our country has a lot of heterosexism that goes on every day. I feel it. I have felt it. I think one of the things that happens when you get older, you begin to be more open about yourself. And so conversations that people once had around me, they just don't have them anymore. So I don't experience it as much as I used to. Another idea is gender expression. And this is when we think about expression, we're really thinking about the way we dress, our mannerisms, our roles, our grooming, our speech. I mean, even among my gay friends, there is a variety of different ways that people dress, the roles that they play in their marriages or in their relationships. So on the spectrum, you can be very masculine, or what society expects of a masculine individual, or very feminine, or you can be androgynous, kind of in the middle. So I put some, like famous people who are in the media today who kind of represent the ideals. So one of the things when I lived in Washington, D.C., there were a lot of gay men who worked out all the time to be as masculine as they possibly could be, big muscles. And that was sort of one of the ways that gender expression was kind of enveloping in the community. In fact, if you didn't go to a certain gym, you couldn't fit into a certain group. So I have even experienced homophobia within the gay community in some ways, and that you kind of have to find your own niche, and to know that it really fits across the entire spectrum. Gender identity is that's how one chooses to identify between the ears. And, there again, this is also a spectrum. I am a man, I am a woman, but you could be lots of other things. You could be genderqueer, you could be bigender, you could be third gender, you could be transgender, which I'm going to sort of introduce you to in just a moment. But the idea here is that what we have between the ears, that identity, how we see ourselves, is very fluid. It's across a big spectrum. And I also kind of want to talk about, from my experience and talking to my trans friends, one of the things that I have been so privileged to do over the last 6 years is serve on the board of directors for Northern Nevada Hopes. And I have got to meet lots of different people in all stages of a transitioning process. And I've had the opportunity to learn so much from them. But when a person's gender identity or expression do not line up with societal expectations, or in some cases, sex assigned at birth, based on what's between the legs, oftentimes those individuals are trans. But I will say, what isn't trans is someone who chooses to dress up in drag. This is my husband and me at a Halloween party. I do not consider myself trans when I dress up like this. I am, a man with makeup, with fun horns and some feathers, and I am expressing myself. I am dressing up, I am playing, I am performing. And so in these cases, I'm not trans, but I am performing, or I'm in drag. And then people who, with cisgender, people whose assigned gender and gender identity align with conventional norms. So those are people who, a man who is attracted to women, they are cisgender. But one of the most offensive terms, and I heard this recently and it just blew my mind. And I actually heard it from someone who knew better. So this term is very outdated. Tranny, don't use it. Pansexuals, and this is really cool. I've tried to throw the flags. Some of these identities have their own flags. Is someone who doesn't limit their sexual or emotional attraction to biological sex, gender identity, or gender. So they're fluid. They may be attracted to all types of different people. And they might like males or females or transgendered people or genderqueer people. And this idea is, many of my students have told me that they identify as pansexual. And I've heard this term, and I knew this term 20 years ago, but I am learning more and more about it every day. So the pansexual, you're not limited. You're fluid, emotional, across the spectrum. Asexuality, I actually had a friend last week who does a lot of work for the LGBTQ plus community, but she is married to a man. And she said up until meeting this man, she has spent her entire life as an asexual. And so the lack of sexual attractiveness to anyone. So the LGBTQIA community, we embrace these people because they often were misunderstood. But there are individuals who have no sexual attraction whatsoever, and they may not have any arousal whatsoever, whether it's male, female, or anyone that fits on the identity spectrum. So I just wanted to kind of go back to the gingerbread person for just a moment to kind of bring us to, we're getting close to the end, to just sort of help us to continue to think about this overall expression of an individual, of a human being, and the way that we identify, the way that we are are attractive for other people, our anatomical, the things that we were provided at birth, and then overall how that makes kind of expression work in the overall. Another tool that some people use, I also really like this one, is the gender unicorn, which talks very similarly to the gingerbread person, where, you know, gender identity could be female, woman, girl, male, man, boy, or either other genders, feminine, masculine, other, female, male, intersex, with what's assigned at birth, physically attracted to women, men, emotional attraction, women, men, other genders. So again, I'm also going to provide resources to the gender unicorn. So this is part of the trans student educational resource movement. And you are more than welcome to dive deeper. There's a lot more to this than what I'm allowed to do in our allotted time. So I hope that you will do that. So how can you become a great ally? So, and I will just say, not only, you know, heterosexual individuals who can become a better ally, but also queer individuals. How can you support your queer people? How can you understand people who may not share the same perspectives as you about being a member of the LGBTQIA community? So it's as easy as providing support and acceptance and just being there. Listen with an open mind, be willing to engage in open conversation, be willing to be wrong, be willing to listen and understand everyone's perspectives, be an ally among your allies, help to educate others. So if you know someone, you know, one of the greatest things that my mother found when I came out to my parents was other parents who also had gay or queer or even transgender children. It really helped her when she had other allies that she could talk to. And then finally, come out as an LGBTQ queer ally. Come out and say, I am your ally. Tell people that you are willing to have conversations about important matters. And be willing to admit you don't know something versus making assumptions. And I will tell you, I've been guilty of this many times over the years of making assumptions about individuals. And sometimes these assumptions occurred after I learned something. So I learned a new idea, and then I'm like, oh, wow, I know something. And then I meet someone who doesn't fit that idea perfectly, and I made an assumption. So being open-minded, approaching this with an open mind and an open heart is really the key here. And finally, live your lives. Live your lives believing in treating others with dignity and respect. Live your lives knowing that there is no wrong way to identify, and there is no right way to identify. And that we are all in this together. We share an earth, we share communities, we share opportunities. And then when you come out as an ally, be there when people are going to pass legislation that could harm the community. Be there when it's time for the courts to make decisions. Be there for people when they need information. Be there for people when they really need to know that they have a support group. Show up, be there. It really makes a big difference. And then finally, vote. Voting is one of the greatest ways that you can become an ally. Picking individuals or candidates who have very positive queer messages, people who have a good background in supporting the queer community, and really do your part in helping us all kind of understand what it'll take. I mean, we've had some big wins in America over the last 15 years. In fact, It was so important to my husband and me on our wedding day to have a friend who was a retired federal judge read the Supreme Court Obergefell ruling that allowed gay marriage in America. In fact, I will never forget having, 200 plus allies sitting in a church. And before any music was played or anything, she got up in her black robe, walked to the front of the church. She had a gavel. It was very dramatic. She pounded the lectern and she read the summary of that ruling. And it really set the stage for our wedding. It really said that we weren't just celebrating our love for each other, but we were celebrating a very hard, long fight for equality in this country. And I will do everything I can to keep that right. I will work my head off as the governor I used to work for. I will work my head off to make sure that I keep the rights that is due to me. And I will do everything I can because I know it's not just about me, but it's about young transgendered individuals. It's about bisexual individuals. It's about people with all kinds of different expressions who must come together. But we can't do it without our heterosexual straight allies. We can't. There's no way. We need you. You are so very important in this movement, and it is a movement. It's continuing. And so again, I have there's another, if you want to look at more resources with our friends at GLAAD, it's glad.org/resources/ally. There's so much great information there that will help you become a better ally. So here are my resources that we will be posting these in the chat bar. The first one, I pulled some information today from the Safe Zone Project. So these are resources. It has a lot of vocabulary, some vocabulary that I didn't have the time to get into today. The gingerbread person can be found at the second link. And then the Trevor Project provides a lot of information if you want to have tough conversations with people in your community. If you wanted to host, there's some really great books that the Trevor Project recommends if you wanted to sort of bring in a queer story in your book group so that those conversations can continue. And then finally, the Human Rights Campaign, an organization that I was very involved in when I lived in Washington, D.C. Again, that state scorecard will really give you an indication of what's happening in America because there's so many messages that are being portrayed. It's sometimes hard unless we literally take some time and sometimes a lot of time to do the research to understand what's going on. But there are some things that are going on all around us right now. There's a lot of individuals who feel very emboldened to begin to write up legislation that could change rights for us in nearly 20 states as I sit here today. So there are a lot of activities that we need to be thinking about. So I am done, but I am going to kind of finally look through. It's really hard for me to look at chats. I told Jackie Shelton before we started that I am not a good chat reader when I'm talking on Zoom, but there are some really great comments in here. Everything from some non-gendered Hebrews. Thank goodness for them. What is the important for straight? Oh, sorry, we've already dealt with that. Okay. So how can we allies intervene in schools who are outlawing books like Heather Has Two Mommies? Well, one of the things is that you should reach out if there are queer parents at that school and tell them that you're their ally and build a network and show up to PTA meetings and be there and be present. Those are very, very powerful ways in which to send messages Organize, get people to talk to each other, vote in school board elections. Absolutely. Voting, I'm not kidding. Like, it's all about, getting the right people in those positions of power. And, I also think that there's a lot of opportunities for all of us to really start having conversations. I've had some really tough conversations with my Southern Baptist family members in North Carolina. I mean, like, some, you would not believe the conversations I've had to have. And they started 20 years ago. And, they don't understand me and they don't always um, support me, but they are very kind to me. And they always hug my husband when we show up. So, I mean, it's little steps. Some things don't just happen overnight, but I think if we keep talking and we keep coming out, individuals, make sure that you communicate to people that you are an ally. And if you haven't come out to people, I hope you will. I hope you will find a comfortable time. And also attend Pride on July 23rd. It's going to be a good Pride. I just know because Northern Nevada Hopes has already got a long list of people who are going to march in that parade. It's such a joy to see those events. And so, yeah, I would be happy. I guess I'm like 6 minutes early, Jackie. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. I think someone can turn on your microphone, or if you want to type them in here, we can continue the conversation.
Yeah, you've talked a lot about a lot of very, I was going to say complicated, but it's really not that complicated, is it? It's really just about treating people like people and not getting into preconceived notions. So I'm sure that there are people on the call who have questions. You're welcome to ask them. If you would be more comfortable, you can ask Todd directly in the chat. So, and the only other one I saw that you missed in the chat was somebody had asked about people, and I think you kind of addressed it, when their pronouns are changed, their pronouns change. She said, some folks have said that they prefer he, him, except for sometimes when they prefer they, them, except for days when they prefer they, z.
Yeah.
Not sure what to do about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know people like that. In fact, a student told me one time that he was a he, him at the university, but if I ever run into him on the weekends, that he is a they, them. And I'm like, okay, I will do my best. And he or they kind of laughed. I think it was during school, so he laughed. I guess he thought that I was like hitting the gay bars up every weekend, and I needed to know that, which I don't anymore. But one of the things that I think about pronouns is that they are people have a very strong emotional connection. And if people have done the work to, the coming out, the process of identity, and they have landed on a pronoun, and we just need to do our best to get it right. And it's that simple. I know it can get complicated, but you can just say, look, I will call you the pronoun that you prefer. But if you educate me about that pronoun and you change it, you're going to have to re-educate me if you want me to keep getting it right.
Well, and I know, like with my daughter, people make mistakes, and that's fine if she corrects them and then they change it. It's there are also people who refuse to honor the pronoun, who refuse to honor the name, and that's, I think, where we run into big problems. It's incredible. It's, to your point, Todd, it's incredibly hurtful because you're denying who they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I know about the they pronoun. In fact, I actually heard about they as a non-gender pronoun before I knew that they can be used as a singular pronoun. I actually knew about they first, and then they kind of had its moment, and then it kind of fizzled off, and then the they pronoun became more dominant in public conversations. And there's there's a very good chance that we may get even more advanced with our pronouns. And it's not that much harder than learning the difference between a noun, verb, and a direct object. And it's just sort of part of being an educated member of society to recognize that things are going to change. I mean, if you look at the African American community, newspapers did not begin to use the word Black or African American until the 60s. They used every other terms. And so we had to work really hard to figure out what does these individuals prefer? And that's what we should be saying.
Right. Well, and it's just, Alice and council just mentioned they were outraged when the term Ms. was introduced. And I'm watching some online now about refusing to choose people's new names. Women have been getting married forever and changing names, and people accept those. Or
yeah, I mean, we
stage names.
Right. I mean, I have a friend in Washington, D.C., a male and female who got married, and they changed their last name so that they just have a whole new last name that their daughter has. Great. Sounds cool. I mean, I had to figure out, I had to change my address book. So when I send them a holiday card that I got the last name right, but they chose to create a whole new last name, which was kind of a derivative of both of their last names.
We have a child who's doing that this summer. They're merging both of their names together.
Yeah.
So, so I don't see any more questions, and it is 7:00, and I know there's a lot of things going on with Art Town that people may want to run out to. Todd, I want to thank you and Tony so very, very much for putting this together. Oh, wait a minute. Let me do this real fast, and then we do have one more question. I am going to put a link in the chat for the Northern Nevada Marches Forward website. If you have ideas for other topics that you'd like to hear about in future presentations, there's a form on there that you can fill out. And also if you have people who would like to discuss those. Our next presentation is going to be on Tuesday, August 9th. It's what women want. It's not that complicated. And so we're going to be talking about a lot of the issues that Todd is talking about that are addressing women right now. Unbelievably, where the majority gendered population is under attack on a lot of different fronts. So we're going to be talking about those and also what we can do about it. Actual tools that we can use to help, like to protect Roe and different things like that. Let's see, Raina just asked about the recording.
August 16th.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Jane. August 16th for what women want. It takes a little bit of time to get these recordings together. A lot because of the rendering. It means that people can't be working on others, and we don't have big budgets for this. So it'll be a little while. We'll send out an email through Eventbrite once the recording is available. Thank you for asking that. And then, so can you explain the best way to go about legal name, dead name, new name in a professional atmosphere?
So I just said, work your head off to use the new name and just try your very best to ask that individual. And I mean, if you could see my screen right now, I have a Post-it note that says, look here. I have names of people that I wanted to make sure I thanked. I mean, I have it all sitting here. So, sometimes if I'm going out to someone who has a new name, I might jot it on a Post-it and put it in my wallet and look at it on the way in to try to get it right. I mean, because the new name is the identity. The new name is the way that they prefer. So they may have a legal name, they may have a dead name, they may have whatever, but the new name is the name.
Okay, so I think that is it. Thank you so much again. Did I put it in yet? On our website, you can go on there and you can see recordings of past presentations that we've done like this. You can see information on the future presentations we have planned. And there's a form on there if you'd like to share your ideas with us. thank you so much for this great presentation, this great education, Dr. Felts. Thank you, Tony, for arranging it. And thank you, Wes, for your tech help. And thank you, Jane, for co-hosting. We will see you all next month.